The playoffs are here, and you can predict the action all the way to the finals with FanDuel Predicts. Predict the spread, the total points, and even the game-winning moments that make the playoffs. Sign up and get a $25 bonus with FanDuel Predicts.
Offered by FanDuel Prediction Markets, LLC, a registered futures commission merchant. 18-plus bonus is non-withdrawable and expires 7 days after receipt. Trading derivatives involves significant risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Manage your activity with their consumer protection tools. Restrictions apply. See terms at FanDuel.com/predicts/bonus-offer-terms.
Listen, all you New Yorkers. Taxi.
Okay, we're looking around.
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
Walter Sterling with Mr. Conroy, a world-class journalist who has amazing facts about how complicit the United States government is with the drug trade to this moment. Is that right, Mr. Conroy?
Yeah, and I have to explain, a little bit that, the CIA takes its marching orders from the White House and so in the National Security Council. So essentially, whatever they're dreaming up inside the White House, they execute. And if that, in the case of, if you go back to Iran-Contra, which everyone remembers in the Gary Webb Dark Alliance series, where he discovered that the Contra insurgents were selling crack cocaine in Southern California, L.A., and that money was being used to buy guns, and they were, moving guns and drugs out of Panama and out of, Central America into to supply the Nicaraguans. To give, they needed guns and they had to have cash to pay for it, and drugs are an easy way to raise the money, especially when Congress isn't authorizing it, which they weren't in that period, and it's a covert clandestine operation. So the CIA is, they're not concerned about busting drugs. That's not their charge. Their charge is, national security and covert ops and collecting intelligence. And what's changed a little bit now with Trump is, he's specifically using them to target, drug cartels, if you will, right, or the drug operations. We've done that. We've done that before, and we've tried different strategies. The CIA is very involved in a lot of that in the early 2000s, and with trying to take down the major cartels. And in that case, they worked with the Sinaloa cartel to get information on the rivals, and they, with DEA, they were trying to bring down the Juarez cartel, and there were at the time there were about 4 or 5 major cartels before the Sinaloa cartel took over everything. But that was clearly done because they had somebody in the Sinaloa cartel, a lawyer, and at the time Chapo Guzman was in charge of the Sinaloa cartel. They all knew about it. They knew who this lawyer was. They knew he was cooperating. At that time, it was quote unquote DEA. But you can't always tell because sometimes DEA carries water for CIA, and sometimes they're actually CIA agents with a DEA cover, especially when they're overseas, right? And these guys, don't know the difference. So they were using this lawyer who was providing, it was a go-between between the Sinaloa cartel leadership and the U.S. government, and they were using it to get information on rival cartels, so we could bust loads from break up the Juarez cartel or the Pacific cartel, whatever cartel, the Tijuana cartel we were after back then. So that, that's the game. And, if you look at Afghanistan, it worked the same way. I mean, opium production exploded during the Afghan war. And that's because we turned a blind eye and enabled, in many ways, opium trafficking out of there because that kept the government propped up. And I've had so many people, a guy that went to China and spied on China, as part of a joint kind of CIA FBI operation, said the same thing. So this is not, and it's repeated over and over. I mean, you could go back to Vietnam and see they did it. Right.
When our government is complicit in the drug trade, and there's a lot of money to be made in the drug trade, and we're complicit and we help bring in drugs, we look the other way, whatever. Does the U.S. government Treasury get the money?
No, I think because they're covert ops, it never goes through any budgetary process. So that, and I can tell you how it worked, for example, with Iran-Contra. The money is used to buy the supplies they need that they got to get covertly, in that case, guns, right? And so along the edges of that, though, there is so much money in the drug business, and there's just so much, potential for corruption that, yeah, you do have corruption along the edges of all of these ops. They're humans, right? And, who's going to know if there's $30,000 in cash? Who's going to know if it's light $5,000? Or let's talk bigger money. But the point is, yeah, it happens, but nobody's going to be, know about it, right? Especially if it happens overseas. So there's tales of that kind, but that's corruption. These operations aren't set up to be moneymakers for the U.S. government. They're set up to, fund covert operations, black ops, that kind of thing.
Bull Conroy, a great journalist, covering the drug trade, a dangerous job in itself. In Venezuela, since the president did what he did, do you believe there's been a shutdown of the drug trade? Do you believe it has been minimized by his actions?
Not by much. Simple figures. The drug boats, they've blown up maybe, if you do the math, with 3 or 4 tons, sounds like a lot, and it is, cocaine on board. You get up to somewhere between 300-400 tons of cocaine, maybe, if they all had cocaine, because I'm not convinced they did. But some clearly did. But they produce, globally, it's 3,400 tons of cocaine a year, and it's a renewable resource, so they can just grow more. So busting the drugs it's like, like one of those games, whack-a-mole, right?
Right. It's like whack-a-mole.
It's not a way to stop the drug trade. And in fact, between the border of Colombia and Venezuela, there's kind of a nomad's land that's now controlled by a guerrilla group called the EZLN, and they were around when the FARC was, which was a leftist guerrilla organization in Colombia for years. But the EZLN is now running drugs, and they're able to do it, still through Venezuela, right? There's still the drug corruption in Venezuela is like the drug corruption everywhere. People get bought off. They buy them off in the States, they buy them off in Mexico, they buy them off in Venezuela and Colombia. And it's just that in Venezuela, because they were under such severe sanctions, there was really no other option. They make money off of oil, which they couldn't really get enough out to make the economy work. So corruption set in, and people were making money. Yeah, these generals will take a cut for letting these narco traffickers run drugs, across the territory, so they can actually ship them out, right, and get them to the market. Yeah, usually out of Venezuela, it's going to Europe. So that's kind of how it works. There's all kinds of independent groups, and there's not like one cohesive drug cartel. As soon as one of these kingpins is taken out, there's 2 or 3 guys vying for that position, or they're starting separate cartels. And it's all
when it
like
gets
money.
to America, who gets it? The mafia? Who meets the boat and distributes it in America?
Oh, most of the stuff, when I covered it, right, was coming across the bridges, and they were buying off custom inspectors, right, and they let the loads pass, right. They have surveillance, figure out when that guy's, they know when a guy's on duty, and they had a very sophisticated setup. They'd send 3 trucks across. Fine if one got busted, and the guy driving it paid him.
But once it got across the bridge, who got it?
Well, this is kind of scary. There were warehouses, like when it came across the bridge, the closest freeway is I-10, Interstate 10. But there were secret warehouses where they would store a lot of this, and then they'd break it down, ship it out, and go through the freeway system. It's traversing our freeway systems and our rails, however they can get it to the major markets, and then it gets broken down further. So it comes in bulk, gets carved up to the market it's headed to, whether it's Chicago or LA or wherever, and then it ends up with another subset of folks who then take the product and get it into the streets. I mean, that's the game. And all these people everyone along the way wants money. So, you have to, that's why it's just not a cohesive unit. The guys working in the United States, don't have any allegiance to the folks in Mexico that are moving this stuff other than the money or the bullets, right? If you can't get out of this business, it's the mob. It's like the mob. Once you're in it, you're stuck. And some guy I just talked to in Seattle, right? He was a major cocaine distributor for the Sinaloa cartel. This was back in the 90s. He got busted eventually, and he turned state's evidence and all that. But the point is, a white guy, and he tried to get out. They tried to kill him. I mean, he got a knife to the head. He survived it. And so,
wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those businesses where they you get sucked into a little at a time, but once you're in deep, you're out. You can't. The only way out is to get killed. You go to jail or you get killed. Yeah,
jail or get killed. Tony Soprano taught us that too.
Yeah, no, it is like that. And I've had these guys tell me this. I say that sounds like it's right out of a movie. But that's the way it works. So
Bull Conroy, a great journalist, filling us in on the drug trade around the world. It's not any better than it was, probably worse. And I thank you very much for being on the other side of midnight with Walter Sterling on the Red Apple Audio Networks.